So what I'm doing is just blocking in some of the wall of the house in the background, painting around some of the trunk up there. So I'm just painting around certain elements down here, leaving them white for now. And I'll come back later, indicate what's there. For example, on this kind of decorative flower pot, I'll come back and put some detailing in to at least suggest the pattern. And it's kind of interesting just to let some kind of accidental effects happen when you're blocking in these broader areas. In other words, some wet into wet is occurring there. Now as I'm working over towards the left-hand side to the edge of there's another door over here. I'm just going to block in some more wet into wet. And it's quite okay if you want to soften the edge like this one that I'm doing. If you can use a technique like this where you're sort of flicking mostly clear water on there, can give some interesting technique, effect, and it does give a certain informality to the painting if it's not a very formal rendered watercolor. You don't want to get too tight, so it's okay to experiment with those effects. There's another artist you should take a look at on YouTube, and his name is Charles Reed, and he's got some very good tutorials. So if you just put Charles Reed watercolor tutorial in there, you'll see some very interesting use of that technique and other techniques. He's a very broad painter with watercolor and extremely skilled, and I think he's worth looking at. And Wyeth, in the painting on the watercolor on the left, is another artist who used a lot of accidental effects, dripping and some splattering on his more informal watercolors. Okay, now I just want to finish off now, and I'm going to show you something about lightening up areas towards the end of the painting. You may find that certain areas got too dark. For example, this part of this shadow under the bay window. I'm just lightening up with an old bristle brush. And you see, the only thing you have to be careful here with is that, this is relatively thin paper. It can get easily fatigued, and it starts to look like a bit of a repair job. But that'll be fine in that area. For slightly broader areas, you can always use an old synthetic brush and scrub a little bit. But all of these things, the techniques are better on higher quality paper, and a little bit heavier than this. However, I'm not going to get too carried away there. One of the last steps I do in a watercolor to unify certain areas is to use a broad wash in certain areas, and that leaves areas like this in the center a little more contrasty, a little more active. The area up here is more unified with this slightly blue wash. And now with that dry, that concludes this little watercolor tutorial in 9 parts.